I'm Emily, a sophomore at a small liberal arts college in upstate New York. This happened last fall when I was living in the old, damp dormitory, room 313. Even now, thinking about it feels like a weight pressing down on my chest, stealing my breath. Our dorm was a crumbling 3-story brick building, its walls cracked and its narrow hallways reeking of mildew and rotting wood. Room 313 was on the top floor, at the end of a dimly lit corridor where the fluorescent light flickered incessantly. The room was a cramped triple: me, Claire, and Sophie. It had 3 rusty metal beds that squeaked with every move, a scarred wooden desk, a massive antique wardrobe carved with eerie patterns, and a grimy window that opened onto the back courtyard. That courtyard felt cut off from the world. It was overgrown with tall, black pine trees that looked like hunched giants under the moonlight. The only light out there had been broken for years, leaving the place drowned in absolute darkness at night. When the wind whipped through the branches, their groans sounded like the wails of something alive. From the first week, every time I glanced at that window, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was staring back from the shadows. It started on a frigid night in early November. It was around 2 a.m., and I was hunched over the rickety desk, struggling to study for an art history midterm under the dim, yellow glow of a desk lamp. Claire and Sophie were asleep, their soft snores and heavy breathing the only sounds in the room. My notes were a mess of highlighted lines, but my eyes burned with exhaustion. Then I heard it, a faint scratching like fingernails dragging across wood. At first, I thought it was a mouse. The building was crawling with them, but the sound didn't stop. It was rhythmic, deliberate, as if something was clawing with purpose. I lifted my head and listened. The sound was coming from the wardrobe. My heart started pounding. The wardrobe was a monstrous, ancient thing, its heavy doors always sticking. Its carved patterns were unsettling, swirling, tangled lines that seemed to writhe in the low light, forming faces that smirked if you stared too long. We rarely used it. It stank of mildew and decay, and once when I hung my clothes inside, they came out smelling like graveyard dirt. Now the scratching grew louder, sharper, as if something was raking the wood with all its strength. I whispered, "Claire? Sophie? You awake?" My voice caught in my throat. No response, just their steady breathing and that cursed sound. I grabbed my phone off the desk, switched on the flashlight, and aimed it at the wardrobe with trembling hands. The cold, white beam illuminated the carved patterns, and for a split second, I swore one of those etched faces blinked. My breath hitched. The scratching stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavier than before, so thick I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. Then, with a slow, agonizing creak, the wardrobe door cracked open. Just a sliver, but enough to make my stomach lurch. The darkness inside was denser than the rest of the room, like a black void that swallowed the light. I wanted to scream, but my body was locked in place. I just stared at that gap, waiting, dread choking me. Then something moved, not like a person, but like a shadow, tall, impossibly thin, its edges blurred and trembling, as if woven from smoke. It glided out of the wardrobe, not touching the floor, and stopped in the middle of the room, right in front of my bed. I couldn't see its face. It didn't seem to have one. It was just a mass of writhing blackness, its outlines twisting in on themselves. But I felt it watching me, not with eyes, but with something deeper, as if it was probing my soul. The air in the room grew heavy, oppressive, like the oxygen was being sucked away. Breathing was a struggle. The shadow didn't move, yet with every second, it felt closer, without ever taking a step. My hands were ice cold, my phone still clutched tight, but the flashlight's beam seemed useless. It passed right through the shadow, as if it wasn't even there. I don't know how long I sat there, seconds, maybe hours. Time stretched like taffy. It was just me and that shadow, and a terror so raw it was driving me to the edge of sanity. Then Sophie mumbled something in her sleep and rolled over. Her blanket slid to the floor with a rustle. The shadow snapped its head toward her, the movement quick and unnatural, like a predator catching a scent. That jolted me out of my trance. I lunged from the chair, my hand slamming the overhead light switch. Harsh white light flooded the room, and the shadow vanished. There was only the wardrobe, its door slightly ajar, swaying gently as if mocking me. I was gasping, my chest tight. Claire and Sophie were still asleep, oblivious. Trembling, I crept toward the wardrobe. My hand shook as I pulled the door fully open. It was empty inside, but a sour, putrid stench hit me like rotting meat. When I shone my flashlight in, I saw them, deep, jagged scratches gouged into the inner wood of the door. They looked like they'd been clawed by something with too many fingers. My heart stopped when I spotted a single strand of hair caught in one of the scratches. Long, black, and damp, as if it had just been pulled from something wet. I knew it didn't belong to any of us. The next morning, I told Claire and Sophie. They thought I was joking at first, but when they saw the scratches and that hair, their faces went pale. Sophie admitted that once, she'd woken up in the middle of the night and felt someone breathing close to her face, but she convinced herself it was a dream. Claire confessed she sometimes heard soft footsteps in the room at night, but she'd chalked it up to mice or her imagination. We decided to report it to the dorm manager that day. When we told her, she gave us a strange look and said, "Room 313, you're better off moving somewhere else." When we pressed her for details, she clammed up, just signed the transfer form. We moved to a room on the first floor the next week. But that shadow didn't let go. I still see it in my dreams. That vague, writhing shape, that suffocating presence. Worse, some nights I wake up to the sound of scratching, not from a wardrobe, but from under my bed. Once, I mustered the courage to shine my flashlight under there. There was nothing, but the floor was covered in faint, claw-like scratches, as if something had been scraping away all night long. I'm Olivia, a freshman at a small college in Connecticut. This happened last winter when I was living in Farley Hall, Suite 3C. I still can't look at empty chairs without feeling like something's moving in the corner of my eye. It's like that night left a piece of itself inside me, and it's never going away. Farley Hall was a brand new building, with glossy white walls that sparkled in the daylight and floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the place into a prism of sunlight. But at night, it was like the building put on a different mask. The hallways got too quiet, and the shadows in the corners seemed to linger a split second longer than they should, like they were waiting for you to turn and catch them. Our suite was a triple: me, Megan, and Riley. The living room was spacious, a flat-screen TV that sometimes changed channels on its own, a gray velvet couch stained with unremovable coffee spills, and a wooden coffee table buried under crumpled notes, dead pens, and half-empty mugs of cold tea. In the corner of the living room stood an old wooden rocking chair, its armrests carved with delicate floral patterns, and a red cushion, so faded it looked like burnt rust. The chair belonged to Riley's grandmother. Riley said when she was a kid, her grandma would sit in it for hours, a wool blanket draped over her knees, telling her old stories, tales of dark forests and people who wandered off and were never found. She always spoke of the chair with a wistful sadness, like it was more than just an heirloom, like it held a piece of her grandma she couldn't let go of. But when I asked where her grandma was now, she just said, "She's gone, but it feels like she's still here." Then she'd go quiet, like she regretted saying anything. From the first day, I had a bad feeling about that chair. It wasn't just that it was old and creaked when you touched it. There was something alive about it. When I was alone in the living room, I felt like the chair was watching me, like a pair of invisible eyes I could never quite meet. One time, as I passed by, I swear it rocked slightly, as if someone had sat down and tapped the floor with their toe. A faint smell, like dried jasmine mixed with damp earth, drifted around it for a moment. Megan once whispered that she'd smelled it too, and one day she even said she saw a shadow on the chair that vanished when she blinked. Riley always laughed and said we'd watched too many horror movies, but I caught her a few times staring at the chair with a quiet dread when she thought no one was looking. One night, I heard her mumbling in her sleep, "Please don't let it come. You promised." One night, during a raging rainstorm that felt like the sky was tearing itself apart, everything changed. It was around 2:45 a.m. Megan and Riley were asleep in their rooms. Megan's soft snoring drifted through her door, and Riley always slept with a pillow over her head, like she was trying to block something out. I was on the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of cheap fabric softener, cramming for a biology exam. The floor lamp cast a warm yellow circle around me, but the rest of the living room was swallowed in darkness. The rain pounded the windows like machine gun fire, and every few seconds, lightning split the sky, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. Tree branches outside that looked like clawing hands scraping at the glass. Suddenly, I felt the air turn cold. Not just chilly, but a bone-deep freeze that seemed to seep up from the floor and coil inside me. My fingers, clutching my pencil, went numb, and my breath fogged in the air like I was in an ice cave. I checked the thermostat. It read 72 degrees Fahrenheit, but it felt like a freezer. As I turned back to the couch, I heard it, a soft creak like the rocking chair swaying. I whipped my head around. The chair, in the dark corner of the living room, was rocking gently, as if someone was sitting in it, patiently pushing themselves back and forth. But it was empty. My heart pounded. The lamp's light barely reached it, and the shadows of the floral carvings on the wall seemed to tremble, like something inside them had woken up. The creaking took on a rhythm, slow, fast, like the heartbeat of something alive. I grabbed my phone off the couch and turned on the flashlight. The sharp white beam hit the chair, and the rocking stopped instantly. But what I saw choked the air out of me. On the red cushion sat a small, handmade cloth doll. It had matted brown yarn hair clumped with what looked like mud, a tattered blue dress stained with dark patches, maybe blood, maybe dirt, and two black button eyes that glinted in the light. Its face, if you could call it that, had a crooked smile stitched with sloppy, blood-red thread. A rancid smell wafted from it, a mix of wet soil, rotting flowers, and something sickly sweet, like perfume left to decay in an old coffin. I swear that doll wasn't in our suite before. None of us owned anything like it. Even Riley, who loved vintage stuff, had never mentioned her grandma having dolls. I stepped closer, my hands shaking. The air around the chair was heavy, like I was wading through a swamp. I picked up the doll. It was ice cold, like a chunk of frost pulled from the deep sea, and its fabric felt damp, as if it had just been dragged through the rain. When I looked into its button eyes, I felt them boring into my mind, two bottomless pits that could swallow me if I stared too long. Then, I swear, one of the buttons twitched like it was blinking. My heart stopped. Before I could set it on the table, I felt the doll's soft, threadbare fingers, those limp scraps of fabric, tighten around my wrist like a real hand squeezing. Its fabric warmed, as if blood had started flowing through it. I screamed and threw it to the floor. It landed with a dull thud, but didn't sprawl out. Instead, it seemed to gather itself, like an invisible force was propping it up. Then, a thin, broken voice, like a child calling from the bottom of a well, echoed through the room. "Olivia, why did you leave me? Sit with me." My legs felt glued to the floor. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The doll was sitting upright on the ground, its head tilted, its stitched smile somehow wider. The chair started creaking again, louder now, like a haunting lullaby pulling me toward it. I saw a shadow on the wall behind the chair, a vague, not quite human shape with long arms and too many fingers, like the branches of a dead tree. The floor lamp flickered and went out. Only my phone's light remained, and in its beam, I saw the doll being dragged toward me across the floor, with nothing pulling it. It was as if the ground itself was tilting to bring it closer. I screamed and bolted for my room. My foot caught on the edge of the rug, and I nearly face-planted, but I scrambled into the hallway and locked my door. The creaking of the chair was everywhere now, like the walls and ceiling were rocking in sync. I crawled under my bed, pulled the blanket over me, and clamped my hands over my ears. But the sound didn't stop. Then came a new noise, a soft tap-tap like fingernails on my door. That same thin voice whispered, "Olivia, open the door. It's cold out here. I'm lonely." I don't know how I survived until morning. I think I passed out from sheer terror. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through my window, and birds were chirping outside. The suite was silent. I crept out, heart in my throat. The living room looked normal. Couch, table, TV. The rocking chair was still, its cushion neat and tidy. No doll. But when I got closer, that rancid floral smell lingered, and on the cushion, a scrap of torn blue fabric, the same as the doll's dress, was caught in the seams. Worse, under the chair, there were faint scratches on the hardwood, like something had clawed at it. I told Megan and Riley what happened. Megan thought I'd had a nightmare or was stressed from the exam. But Riley went pale. She said, "My grandma, she had a cloth doll that went missing when I was a kid. She always said it was sad because it was alone. Once, she even told me she felt like it was calling her in her dreams. When I said the doll knew my name, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, before she passed, Grandma always said if I kept anything of hers, I had to be careful. She said old things sometimes hold onto a piece of their owner." We went to the door manager. When we told her, she frowned and said, "Again, these old heirlooms always stir up trouble." When we asked what she meant, she said a few years ago, a student brought an antique chandelier to the dorm, and soon after, there were reports of strange noises and shadows. "I don't want rumors spreading," she added, "but you should get that chair out of here. Old stuff like that, it can carry bad energy." She suggested we dispose of it ourselves, since she didn't want the maintenance crew getting spooked and gossiping around campus. A few days later, we hauled the chair to the dorm storage room. As we set it down, I swear I heard a faint, childlike sob, like something was begging not to be left in the dark. We locked the storage door and never went back. We switched to a suite on the ground floor. But that night feels like it took a piece of me with it. Even now, when everything's quiet, I sometimes hear a faint creak, like a rocking chair swaying in the distance. Worse, one day while emptying my backpack, I found a black plastic button, exactly like the doll's eyes. And sometimes, when I'm alone, the smell of dried flowers fills my room, and I swear I hear a child's voice whispering, "Olivia, sit with me." I'm Nathan, a junior at a remote college in Oregon. This happened in the fall of 2023 when I was living in Hillview Residence, Suite 5B. I still can't hear a clock tick without feeling like my heart's about to stop. It's like that night left a shadow inside me that follows me everywhere. Hillview was a modern building, all glass and steel, like it had sprouted from the misty forests around campus. It wasn't one of those creepy old mansions you'd expect for a ghost story, but something about it wasn't right. Maybe it was the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights, even when they were off, or how the air always felt too still, like the building was holding its breath. Our suite was a two-person setup, me and my roommate, Ethan. We had a shared living area with a sagging blue couch, a mini fridge that grumbled like an underground chainsaw, a tiny kitchenette with an always sticky counter, and two single bedrooms off a short hallway. In the middle of the living room, mounted on the wall above the couch, was a large antique wall clock. A heavy, round thing with a glossy dark wooden frame and a tarnished brass face etched with Roman numerals. Its second hand was a thin black needle that moved with a loud, dry tick-tick-tick. Ethan said the clock came with the suite, left behind by a previous tenant. In that modern space, it felt like an outsider, like a relic from another century. From the first day, I didn't like it. Its ticking was too loud, echoing through the suite even when I closed my bedroom door. Sometimes, I felt like it ticked faster, like it was rushing to finish something. One night, I glanced at it and swear the second hand jumped backward, but when I blinked, everything was normal. I told Ethan, and he just shrugged and said, "Old clocks are weird, man. Ignore it." It started on a foggy October night, one of those nights when the mist clung to the windows like a second skin. Around 3:15 a.m., I jolted awake. I don't know why, but my heart was racing like I'd been in a nightmare I couldn't recall. My room was dark, just a sliver of moonlight slipping through the blinds, painting striped shadows on the wall. I lay there, trying to calm down, when I realized something was wrong. The clock's ticking, that constant, annoying rhythm that was like the pulse of the suite, had stopped. The silence was so heavy I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I grabbed my phone, 3:17 a.m., and crept to the living room, thinking the clock's battery must have died. Ethan was away for the weekend, visiting his family, so the suite was all mine. When I stepped into the living room, the air felt thick, like I'd walked into a room full of silent people. The clock was still on the wall, its hands frozen at 3:17, the exact time on my phone. But it wasn't the stillness that twisted my stomach. It was the shadow cast on the wall behind it. Not the clock's shadow, but something else. A tall, hunched figure, with limbs too long and a head tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was sniffing the clock. The shadow didn't move, but I felt it watching me, its presence pressing against my chest like an icy hand. I froze, my phone's flashlight trembling in my grip. The shadow quivered, like it sensed my gaze, and then the clock let out a single, sharp tick, a sound like a bone snapping. The second hand jerked backward, then forward, then back again, and started spinning, but in reverse, fast and frantic. The room seemed to pulse with it, the walls vibrating faintly, like the suite was trapped in a heartbeat. I stumbled back, my bare feet sticking to the cold linoleum, and ran for the front door. I twisted the knob, but it wouldn't budge like someone was holding it shut from the outside. I pulled harder, pounded on the wood, but it was like the door had fused with the frame. The ticking started again, but it wasn't steady anymore. It was a chaotic rhythm, tick-tock, tick-tick, filling the room and burrowing into my skull. I turned back to the clock, and the shadow was gone from the wall, but now I felt something behind me. Not a sound, not a touch, just a weight, like eyes boring into the back of my neck. The air grew colder, and a smell hit me, damp and metallic, like rusted iron mixed with wet leaves. My phone's screen flickered and went black, leaving me in near darkness, with only the moonlight to see by. Then I heard it, a low, guttural hum, not quite human, not quite mechanical. It came from the clock, vibrating through the wood, forming a single word. Nathan. My knees buckled. The hum grew louder, splitting into multiple voices, like a chorus of whispers chanting. Nathan. Nathan, stay. I ran to the kitchenette, grabbed a butter knife from the drawer, and tried to jam it into the door's lock, hoping it would give. The knife bent, useless, and the hum turned into a low, wet chuckle, a sickening sound that made my skin crawl. I don't know what gave me the courage, but I turned and ran to the clock. I yanked it off the wall, its weight heavier than it should have been, like it was fighting me. The wood was warm, almost pulsing, and the brass face felt slick, like it was sweating. With all my strength, I hurled it to the floor, and it landed with a deafening crack. The ticking stopped, the humming stopped, the air lightened, and the door clicked softly, like it had never been locked. I didn't wait another second. I bolted out, down the stairs, and spent the rest of the night in the campus's 24-hour library, under the glare of fluorescent lights, shaking until dawn. When I went back the next morning, the clock was still on the floor, its face cracked, its hands bent at odd angles. The wooden frame was splintered, and a rusty stain seeped from the cracks, like the clock was bleeding. I didn't touch it. I called Ethan and told him what happened. He laughed at first, thinking I was messing with him, but when he saw the clock, his face went pale. He said, "I didn't tell you, but the guy who lived here before us, that clock was his. He was weird, always talking about time, like it was alive. He dropped out after a month, said this dorm was wrong. The next week, I moved to an off-campus apartment. They gave the clock to another student, but even now, some nights, right as I'm drifting off, a faint ticking starts in my head. And once, just once, when I woke up in the middle of the night, I swear I saw a shadow on my wall, hunched, with long fingers like it was staring at my wristwatch." That wraps up 3 bone-chilling stories, from the shadowy figure lurking in the backyard, to the eerie sound scratching at the motel door, to the swings moving on their own in a foggy park. But now it's your turn. What you experienced? Maybe you heard something unexplainable in the dead of night, or saw a shape in the darkness that still haunts you. Drop your creepiest true stories in the comments below, whether it's a paranormal encounter, a disturbing moment, or something that just felt wrong. The scariest ones might make it into a future video. If these tales gave you chills, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next set of nightmares. Stay safe out there, and double check your locks tonight.